one of the things that really struck me about the interviews with people is particularly the parents saying, you know, it's not going to be good for them socially. It's not something that I want them to do. But the greatest insight came from the little girl who said, you have to think about people's feelings. And if we don't talk about swearing with our kids, if they learn swearing just from their classmates in the playground, they're not going to have a sense of how swearing affects people's feelings, but also how swearing isn't just directly correlated with necessarily being awful to people. There are ways to be really vile without ever using a swear word.
This is true, but none of this is a case for swearing, is it? This is a case for educating your children about swearing. Why do you think that actually swearing can be good for you, even pain relief?
Yeah, so it's about 75% of the swearing, when you record people just using language naturally, about 75% of the swearing we do isn't abusive or isn't offensive or isn't even out of anger. Quite often it's things like elation or sympathy with one another, particularly among blokes who aren't so good at, you know, sort of putting their arms around each other and offering a Kleenex. That's saying, oh, that's blooming terrible, can be a really good way of showing that you've taken on board.
People take offence to it, and I think, and a good point there, you just said the word blooming, because it is not, swearing is not socially acceptable. There's a reason we cannot swear on live television now, is because people find it unacceptable and it does offend. And I think that is what is key, is creating those boundaries, particularly in our children, and it starts there. But I do get the point about educating, but I don't think that using swearing liberally and saying that actually it is OK to use it in these circumstances, because I think it just confuses children going through life about when they can or they can't.
Can I just say, Tracy on Twitter said, I used to let my kids swear only on Sundays.
And they one day you shouldn't.
Well, is that a funny thing to do on Sunday?
Let's have a roast and a good old swear.
It's a cheat day.
That was very, very funny.
I mean, the thing about it being offensive is that there are terms that we don't use when we don't know who we're speaking to. And one of the reasons why the research shows that swearing is really good at team bonding is it's kind of a verbal trustful almost. So you're showing your friends, particularly here in the UK and in Australia and New Zealand, there is this thing called jocular abuse. That thing where you swear with your mates and you're saying, I trust you to trust me enough to know that I'm not trying to be offensive. And also I'm showing that I know exactly where your limits are, that I can go this far and no further. That's actually really sophisticated.
Tell me about
reasoning.
the hand in ice thing. So this is an experiment you do on your road shows and things.
Yeah, definitely. I've stolen this from a research team up in Kiel, headed by Dr. Richard Stevens. And if you stick your hands in ice water, if you're allowed to use a single swear word, you can generally keep your hands in ice water about half as long again as if you're using a neutral word. And I tend to do this with live audiences. I've done it at the Royal Institution, which was, you know, this august scientific place. I've got this fantastic woman who came and swore like a trooper for us. And
I bet you did that just for the sheer fun of it, didn't you? Watching the looks on their faces.
And you can sort of you see who puts their hand up to volunteer to do it, and you kind of want someone who's not just up there wanting to swear for the heck of it. I appeared with a comedian a while back, Jess Fosterque, and she said that if your punchline is a swear word, you haven't got a joke. That swearing is used, we can see from the patterns of activation in the brain that
so
it's very good.
It's a release. It's a release of tension.
But then how do you? But then how do you educate that with kids? Because kids always hurt themselves. My son fell over yesterday and whacked his head. Now, if he'd at the age of 2 suddenly come out with an expletive, I would have been horrified. So,
he would have had a wallet.
No, no, I don't go in for that, my bit. No. But as you say, no, of course not. But how do you act? And that's what I think. It's about that boundary. And I think if you're not giving them, if it's kind of, well, sometimes you can use it, sometimes you can't use it. How are you then setting themselves up for a fall going ahead in life if they go into a job interview and suddenly, you know, drop an F-bomb or something, or they go around to someone's house to play, and then they swear in front of a parent? Yes. I would be horrified. And if my son swore in front of my elderly grandmother, or, you know, in certain situations, I would be really offended.
That's partly because you know you'd be judged as a parent.
That's
really good point. And I think that's, yes, it is.
I want to equip parents to cope with that moment of sort of shame and embarrassment of, oh, my kid swore in a place that was inappropriate. And instead of saying, look, we're going to shut this conversation down, of talking about why that's inappropriate. And you mentioned boundaries, and I think that those boundaries ought not necessarily to be particular words, but ways that you're trying to make another person feel. Because if my kid was sent home for calling someone ugly or stupid, I'd be just as mortified.
It is. You're absolutely...
And I think that's in the same sphere as well, negative language.
There's a couple couple of quick things that Claire on Twitter says. I tell my daughter, she doesn't say how old she is, people who swear have a lack of vocabulary and can't find the proper words to express themselves. But I fall into that category. I swear a lot. But I don't swear in front of my son.
The research shows the opposite, though, that people who swear most fluently are also the ones that, when you test their vocabulary, have
I really hope my children aren't watching, because you're not helping my cause at all at the moment.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know, that's not good. But fascinating to hear about. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.